Crimea is not just land. It is leverage. It is power. It is pressure. Whoever controls Crimea controls the direction of this war. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are discussing a place that has quietly become the center of the Ukraine war. That place is Crimea. Crimea is not just a peninsula on a map. It is a military platform. It is a political symbol. It is an economic gateway. Since the conflict escalated, every major move has connected back to Crimea in some way. Russia views Crimea as proof of strength and survival. Ukraine views Crimea as a symbol of sovereignty and justice. For global powers, Crimea represents escalation risk. This is why the world watches it closely. Control of Crimea shapes naval dominance in the Black Sea. It affects supply routes, missile reach, and air defense coverage. It also influences negotiations and diplomatic pressure. No serious peace discussion ignores Crimea. No major military plan excludes it. When analysts talk about turning points, Crimea is always mentioned. This is not coincidence. Geography gives Crimea natural defensive advantages. Infrastructure gives it military value. History gives it emotional weight. That combination makes Crimea unique in this war. Understanding Crimea helps explain why the conflict continues. It also explains why solutions remain difficult. In this video, we will break down why Crimea still decides the Ukraine war. We will examine military logic, political stakes, and global reactions. Everything will be explained clearly and neutrally. Stay with us as we begin this deep analysis step by step. To understand Crimea's importance, we must start with geography. Crimea sits deep in the Black Sea. From this position, military forces can project power in multiple directions. Naval vessels operating from Crimea can reach key shipping lanes quickly. Air bases allow extended flight coverage across southern Ukraine and surrounding regions. Missile systems place there increase response speed and reduce warning time. This gives the controlling side a strategic advantage. Crimea also acts as a natural fortress. Water surrounds most of it, limiting attack directions. Supply routes can be protected more easily than exposed land fronts. This is why Crimea has long been valued by military planners. Beyond warfare, geography affects economics. Ports in Crimea connect trade routes between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Energy transport routes nearby add further importance. Losing access changes regional balance. For Russia, Crimea secures southern maritime access. For Ukraine, Crimea represents blocked opportunity and lost control. Geography does not change quickly. That is why Crimea remains relevant year after year. Even when front lines shift elsewhere, Crimea stays central. Any attempt to reshape the war without addressing Crimea faces limitations. This is why analysts call it a strategic anchor. Without Crimea, sustaining long-term control in the south becomes difficult. Geography alone does not decide wars, but it heavily influences outcomes. In this case, Crimea's location amplifies every military and political decision made by both sides. Military infrastructure is another reason Crimea matters so much. Over the years, Crimea has been heavily developed for defense. Airfields, radar systems, naval bases, and supply depots form an integrated network. This allows rapid deployment and coordination. From Crimea, forces can support operations across southern Ukraine. They can also defend against incoming threats more efficiently. This infrastructure did not appear overnight. It was expanded deliberately. Control of Crimea means inheriting this entire system. Removing it or replacing it is extremely difficult during active conflict. For Ukraine, this infrastructure represents a challenge. It increases operational complexity and risk. For Russia, it represents stability and depth. Military planners value depth because it absorbs pressure. Crimea provides that depth. It also serves as a logistics hub. Equipment, fuel, and personnel can be rotated through established routes. This reduces strain on other fronts. When analysts discuss sustainability, Crimea becomes central again. Without it, maintaining southern operations becomes harder. With it, pressure can be redistributed. Infrastructure also influences deterrence. While protected bases discourage direct attacks, they raise escalation concerns for external actors. This creates caution in international responses. Every missile system and radar installation in Crimea adds to this equation. Military infrastructure turns geography into real power. That is why Crimea's role remains decisive today. Crimea also carries deep political symbolism. For Russia, it represents national pride and historical narrative. It is often framed as a corrective moment. Losing it would be seen domestically as a major setback. This makes political compromise difficult. Leaders rarely give up symbols easily. For Ukraine, Crimea represents territorial integrity. It stands for international law and recognized borders. Regaining it would symbolize resilience and justice. These opposing narratives harden positions. They reduce flexibility in negotiations. Politics is not only about power. It is about perception. Crimea shapes perception strongly. Internationally, it signals resolve. Any change in its status sends a message. Allies and rivals interpret that message carefully. This is why statements about Crimea are often measured. Political leaders know words can escalate situations. Crimea also affects internal politics. Public opinion reacts strongly to developments there. Elections, approval ratings, and legitimacy become tied to it. This adds pressure on decision makers. Political symbolism transforms Crimea into more than territory. It becomes identity. When identity is involved, conflicts last longer. Compromise becomes costly. This is one reason why the war remains unresolved. Crimea anchors political narratives on both sides. Until that anchor moves, political positions remain fixed. Understanding this helps explain current stalemates and future risks. International reactions further elevate Crimea's importance. Global powers see Crimea as a potential escalation trigger. Any major change there could alter involvement levels. This makes policymakers cautious. Support decisions are often calibrated around Crimea. Sanctions, military aid, and diplomatic signals reflect this sensitivity. Allies want to avoid sudden shifts that could widen the conflict. At the same time, they cannot ignore developments. This creates a delicate balance. Crimea also influences alliance unity. Different countries assess risk differently. Some emphasize stability. Others emphasize principle. Crimea sits at the center of that debate. It tests commitment without forcing immediate confrontation. Media coverage reflects this tension. Reports focus heavily on Crimea because audiences understand its significance. Markets react as well. Energy prices and shipping insurance respond to perceived risks in the Black Sea. Investors watch Crimea closely. This shows how a regional issue becomes global. International law discussions also revolve around Crimea. Precedents matter. How Crimea is treated influences future disputes elsewhere. That is why global institutions remain engaged. They may not act directly, but they monitor constantly. Crimea's status affects more than Ukraine and Russia. It affects global norms. That broader impact keeps it in focus. Every diplomatic statement, meeting, and summit reflects awareness of Crimea's weight in the conflict. Crimea's role in negotiations cannot be overstated. Any peace framework must address it. Ignoring Crimea leaves agreements incomplete. History shows that unresolved core issues resurface later. Negotiators understand this risk. However, addressing Crimea directly is politically dangerous. It requires concessions that leaders struggle to justify. This creates a negotiation paradox. Crimea is essential, yet difficult. Interim solutions have been discussed. Demilitarization ideas, international monitoring, or delayed status talks appear occasionally. None have gained lasting traction. Trust deficits remain high. Without trust, creative solutions fail. Crimea also affects timing. Parties may delay talks hoping conditions improve. As long as Crimea remains contested, incentives to wait exist. This prolongs the conflict. External mediators face similar challenges. Pushing too hard risks rejection. Moving too slowly risks irrelevance. Crimea sets the pace. It also sets limits. Negotiations may progress on other issues, but eventually return to Crimea. This cycle has repeated multiple times. Analysts recognize this pattern. It suggests that sustainable peace requires addressing Crimea directly. Whether that happens soon is uncertain. What is clear is that no agreement can bypass it. Crimea remains the final question mark. Until it is resolved, stability remains fragile. Public opinion plays a significant role in shaping Crimea's impact. In both societies, views on Crimea are deeply entrenched. Media narratives reinforce these views daily. This hardens attitudes over time. Leaders respond to voters. When public opinion is firm, policy flexibility shrinks. Crimea becomes a red line. Social media amplifies this effect. Images, stories, and claims circulate rapidly. Emotional responses often outweigh strategic calculation. This makes de-escalation harder. Even small incidents in Crimea generate strong reactions. They shape national mood. International audiences are influenced as well. Sympathy, concern, and fear spread quickly. This global attention increases pressure on decision makers. Public opinion also affects allies. Democratic governments must consider voter sentiment when supporting policies. Crimea's symbolic nature makes it easier to mobilize opinion. This adds another layer of complexity. Changing public narratives requires time and trust. During active conflict, both are scarce. As a result, positions remain rigid. Analysts often focus on military factors, but public opinion quietly constrains options. Crimea exemplifies this dynamic. It is not just about strategy. It is about belief. Beliefs guide behavior. Until beliefs soften, solutions remain distant. Economic considerations further reinforce Crimea's importance. Control of Crimea affects regional trade and investment. Ports influence shipping routes. Insurance costs rise when risk increases. This impacts global supply chains. Energy infrastructure nearby adds another layer. Pipelines, terminals, and transit routes shape energy security. Markets react to perceived instability. Crimea therefore influences prices far beyond the region. Tourism once played a role as well. While diminished, its symbolic loss or return matters economically. Reconstruction costs also factor in. Whoever controls Crimea faces long-term financial responsibility. Infrastructure maintenance, security, and services require resources. Sanctions and restrictions complicate this further. Economic pressure becomes part of strategy. Crimea sits at the intersection of these pressures. It magnifies them. For Ukraine, regaining Crimea could unlock economic potential. For Russia, retaining it avoids costly disruption. These calculations influence decision-making quietly but consistently. Economics rarely dominate headlines, but they shape endurance. Wars are sustained or ended partly by economic capacity. Crimea affects that capacity. This is another reason why it remains central. It is not only a battlefield. It is an economic lever with long-term consequences. Looking ahead, Crimea will continue to shape future scenarios. Even if front lines shift elsewhere, Crimea remains decisive. Any escalation there risks wider involvement. Any compromise there reshapes the conflict. Military technology developments also matter. Advances in surveillance, missiles, and drones change calculations. Crimea's defenses and vulnerabilities evolve accordingly. This keeps it relevant. Political transitions could alter dynamics as well. New leadership or changing alliances may adjust priorities. Yet Crimea's core value persists. Analysts model multiple outcomes, but Crimea appears in all of them. That consistency is telling. It suggests that Crimea is not a temporary factor. It is structural. Structural factors outlast individual battles. They influence strategy over years. This is why long-term planning focuses on Crimea. Whether through deterrence, negotiation, or pressure, strategies revolve around it. Ignoring this reality leads to misinterpretation. Understanding it improves clarity. Observers, policymakers, and citizens benefit from this perspective. Crimea is not just about today's headlines. It is about future stability. That is why the world continues to watch. In conclusion, Crimea still decides the Ukraine war because it concentrates power, symbolism, and consequence in one place. Geography provides advantage. Infrastructure provides capability. Politics provides meaning. Economics provides pressure. Together, these elements make Crimea decisive. Removing any one element does not change the whole. This is why the conflict remains unresolved. It is also why simplistic explanations fail. Understanding Crimea requires seeing the full picture. Neutral analysis helps cut through noise. It reveals why decisions are cautious and outcomes uncertain. The world knows this reality. That is why Crimea dominates discussions quietly but persistently. As events continue, Crimea will remain central. Observers should watch it closely, not for dramatic headlines, but for subtle shifts. Those shifts often signal larger changes ahead. Thank you for watching this detailed breakdown. If you found this analysis useful, like the video, share it, and subscribe for more clear explanations. Comment below with your thoughts. Stay informed, stay analytical, and we will see you in the next video.